Yuma, welcome back to this next session of our last digital transformation session this year. I would like to welcome Cathy Foley to speak to us now. Cathy needs little introduction. She is absolutely a star who has come to be Australia's Chief Scientist with a real vision and a passion for transformation using digital means that will benefit industry, community and the world. She's one who's inspiring us with her ability not just to be passionate, but to make sure that transformations happen. So Cathy, with that introduction, I'll pass over to you.
Oh, thanks, Roxanne, and hello, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'm speaking to you, I'm in Canberra today. Normally I'm in Sydney, but I'm speaking on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal people. And I want to pay my respects to them and to the traditional custodians of other lands where you, the audience members, are based. I want to acknowledge the elders who are caring for those lands and pay my respects to the old ones who've come before, but also the young ones who will follow. So it's been wonderful to be invited to talk to you today because I've always loved libraries. And it's fantastic to be speaking to so many of Australia's librarians because as a child, I loved my weekly visits to the library. It's so much so that when I came home, I actually started labeling my own books and made my homemade library stickers featuring a made-up version of the Dewey Decimal System. So there's no hope for me. But also as past Chief Scientist of CSIRO, I had the opportunity to engage with the publishing house that they operate and their extensive library. So I have a really good understanding of the issues and of publishers and librarians. I also have seen the frustration and lost opportunity of government departments and startup deep techs that have very limited access to the latest research literature. And when I've spoken to citizen scientists and school teachers, they've talked about how much access to information means to them. And so I'm coming into the role of Australia's Chief Scientist, which I'm still quite thrilled to have been that, and it's 12 months now since I was announced. I was actually pleased when my letter of expectation from my minister included a request for me to consider open access. And in today's world of digital technologies and access, there's never really been a better opportunity. So why am I so keen to tell you about this? Australia's librarians, information officers, and others in that space about the work in my open access. Well, it's because you are some of our key custodians of knowledge, as we've just heard. And indeed, the librarian is the first custodian of knowledge, and that many of our students will ever encounter you as their first place. And your sector continues to hold that role for our general public throughout our lives. And I want you to be part of this process. And I want to hear your feedback and to have access to the fullest range of resources that you can, regardless of how well resourced your particular workplace is. So what is the elephant in the room here? We all know there is an imbalance in scientific publication and the whole system, and it's not sustainable in its current design. But there are ways we can optimize this, and I want to spend some time talking about that today. So look, I know you're a well-informed audience, so I don't want to dwell on this, but I think it's important that we consider what I've included in this slide, which is the traditional publication model that operates today. It's a fundamental part of the research process. So a researcher selects a journal and then prepares a manuscript and sends that into to the journal to be peer reviewed through a peer review process. And it requires revisions going back and forward. And if anyone's been involved with that, it could be quite a complex, heartbreaking time very often. And eventually the journal accepts the manuscript. And then the journal pays its part by commencing the editing, proofreading and typesetting process. And then it publishes the research. So you can see it's complicated and surprisingly, generally quite poorly understood, even amongst the research community, which is another issue. So navigating this issue, this system, and responding to referees' comments and getting your paper into print is a timely way that is challenging. And it perhaps, probably the most fundamental challenge lies in the business model, the copyright ownership, and the management and consequent access of the papers by researchers, libraries, and the broader community. The reason is that we have content provided by publicly funded research, peer review that on average can take up to 6 hours per paper, done by researchers, and that's not paid and it shouldn't be paid. The editors and editorial boards usually have a small honorarium, doesn't anywhere near cover the effort and the work done. And the publishers, they provide a really important service, and they make their output available, generally through a subscription model. And researchers can also pay an extra fee to have their paper made open access. And that fee on average is about $3,000, but it can be as high as $15,000. So it's clear there's room to optimize. I have to say, I love this quote from one of our Eureka Prize winners this year. It was a Year 9 student, Jonathan Davis. And he said that I read a lot, and when a concept grips me, I'll hunt it down, do researching like they taught us at school, make sure we use reliable sources. And when I did my first project as a child, I went to the local library and looked up everything I could in the Encyclopedia Britannica. But we don't have the Encyclopedia Britannica anymore, but libraries are still valued repositories of information for people looking for something beyond Google. The problem with paywalls, which is in front of most of research literature, is that they're creating inequalities between those who can access the latest research with others who can't. It's sort of like apples and oranges. It shouldn't matter how affluent an individual school or library is for a student or member of the public to be able to access what they're looking for. Open access won't fix educational inequality on its own, nor is it intended to, but it does have a huge array of other flow-on benefits throughout the system. In a traditional publishing system, the inequality isn't just in the educational space. It's also there for the authors of papers, who are the researchers. And there are multiple ways that open access can improve the system for everyone. So one is open access isn't currently available to all researchers who would like to publish through it. Researchers also shouldn't have to choose between funding more research or paying to make their work open access. It's essentially sacrificing depth for exposure. The second thing, existing open access repositories accept papers at different stages of the review process. Sometimes they're when it's submitted, others when it's accepted, and some with the final published version. And that means some are without peer review. There can be version control issues, and they may fall outside of the publisher's ability to distribute corrections or updates. We need an open access path that is up to the standards of our scientific community and that maintains the trust of the general community in the quality and integrity of Australian research. And the third point is that we need to make sure that all the inputs to the system are transparent and acknowledged. And that's including the researchers, the peer reviewers, editors, publishers, and the funders. And currently, we have to say that some have better outcomes from the process than others. So look, I want to tell a story now very briefly about how open access really can lead to major impacts. And the obvious one is to look at what happened during the COVID pandemic, which of course we're still experiencing. Normally, it takes about somewhere between 10 to 20 years to develop a vaccine. And when we saw the COVID pandemic happen, you would have seen that the first thing was that the genome of the virus was released very early on by Eddie Holmes via Twitter, which he also won the Prime Minister's Prize for Science just last week. And the thing was really interesting was also at that time, the publication houses got together and probably under the encouragement by the USA to say that all papers relating to addressing the COVID pandemic would be made open access. And so as a consequence, everyone, regardless of where you were in industry, government, academia, or even the general public, were able to read the latest literature. And so instead of the usual vaccine development taking that length of time I mentioned, up to 10, 20 years, by the time you include clinical testing and so on, what we saw was the development of a vaccine in 6 to 9 months. And so that we were able to see something which had never been done before, where it was a rapid development of not just one, but multiple virus-beating vaccines. And we're seeing that now getting to a point where we're seeing it roll out in a way we've never done before. And the open access of the research literature that led to this was a very critical part. So with that in mind, my proposal is this, and that is an Australian model for open access. And it's a little bit different to that open access that's been available and been thought of around the world. But to begin with, we approach this by having some principles, and I've got 8 of them here, which is what we're working to. Because I always think if you start with a principled approach, you're able to actually remember what you're trying to achieve when you've got all the roadblocks and difficulties coming your way. And I'm just going to go through them now. The first one is that we need to use and increase the benefits from Australia's existing expenditure on academic subscriptions and publishing. We need to allow people residing in Australia to freely access all peer-reviewed journal articles from the date of publication. The third one is we want to ensure Australian peer-reviewed journal articles in all discipline areas are openly accessible internationally from the date of publication. And we want to recognise the role of publishers in the system and ensure the sustainability of their businesses. Going on to the 5th one, we want to make sure we support research integrity by facilitating the provision of quality metadata, keeping versions of record and assisting in discoverability. The 6th one is to preserve author autonomy regarding where they want to publish their work. We want to use infrastructure that is user-friendly, internationally interoperable, and designed for future developments in publishing and open access. And finally, it needs to be equitable, and that's equitable for all stakeholders. So this is a proposed model as a solution. We know there's a lot of money in the system with Australian organisations already paying for academic publishing access. These are in the universities, some libraries, state governments, Commonwealth governments, and public funded agencies. So I envisage a system where those funds could be available to a central implementation body, which then negotiates agreements of open access with all publishers and journals. And in return, and facilitated by those agreements, my goal is for every person based in Australia to have access to all academic journals, and for all Australian papers to be open access to the rest of the world to read. I want this to be an ongoing, sustainable model with an ongoing funding stream. And why all Australians? Well, imagine if mainstream journalists, citizen scientists, industry, policy developers, science-interested general public, or non-university educated people, professionals. Imagine what would happen if all Australians were able to actually get to real information, as opposed to often the information available on the web, which is not necessarily able to be trusted. So where's my progress to date? So first of all, I highlighted this as a priority at the National Press Club in March, and it's been very well received. I then took this concept to the National Science and Technology Council, which is the main council for the Prime Minister to understand and have research and science advice. And this has been supported and encouraged. And then the other we've done is developed a prospective analysis, which is looking at what is the real roadblocks, the opportunities, and the issues that we need to address if we are going to progress this model. And that's underway, and we're on our way to seeing that come to fruition. We've also seen Council of Australian University Librarians actually announcing 4 major transformative agreements. So things are changing really fast. So it's a really good time to be considering this. And finally, the thing which has really amazed me is, as I've talked about this during the year, the international collaborators and other librarians and other people working in open access have realised that that the public is another stakeholder which probably hadn't been taken into account previously. So one of the things I want to raise is that we have great ambition in Australia. We see the potential of science, technology, research in general, being able to have a major impact on us being able to be a prosperous nation we really want to be, solving issues from whether it's climate change and developing low emissions technologies and having climate adaptation, through to battling the pandemic, through to all the other things that we know are touching us every day. But to do that, we have to realise that research is our superpower, and we have to release this if we want to see these benefits. So today, I'm actually calling on you to see if you can help me with this, because I need your input to be able to navigate what has to happen, where the roadblocks are, where the advantages are, to create a business case and the model to say this is worth doing. So this is up on the screen there, is an email address, openaccess@chiefscientist.gov.au, which I hope that you will feel that you can contact me there to actually put forward ideas, concerns, issues, and things and solutions, I guess, of things we can do jointly to be able to navigate this to something which I think will make a huge difference, so that we can realise this superpower of research, that we can make sure that all Australians are able to be informed and be able to participate in the great understanding of the world around us to turn it into something that's special for all of us. So I'll leave it there, and I'll look forward to having some discussion, Roxanne. You're on mute.
Oh my gosh, so sorry. Thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. You took us on a very fast-paced tour of so many different issues that are really important for us.
No, thanks.
We have a couple of questions, are really, really important. It's great. The three questions we've already had from the audience were, the first one, your career has seen great engagement with many different groups in sectors. What do you think was the greatest insight that you've gained in your career about taking on these big challenges?
Thank you so much for asking that question, because it's really, it's almost like I wrote it myself. And the thing which I've actually realised is that science on its own is not very helpful. Any particular research on its own is not able to solve the problems. What it does is tell us ways forward. What turns things into outcomes and impact is when we bring the whole of the different parts together. So I call it science plus or research plus. So you need to, if you say it's science, it needs to be engineered into something that can be useful, because a science paper is great knowledge, but it doesn't actually do anything more than inspire us. So I have to engineer the outcomes, and that's social as well as physical. The next thing we have to have is, and you just have to look at technologies or things that have really made a difference to us. They've had to have a social license to say, yes, as a society, we're willing to do this. So we need to bring in the social science to help us guide an understanding of this. And I think social media is a good example of where it sort of crept up on us, and we're now trying to unpick it to see how can we actually put the genie back in the bottle and control it in a way so it does less harm, or preferably no harm. The next thing is making sure that we have the user interface and design, and that brings in the humanities, arts, and social sciences as well, because, you know, you have those terrible interactions with any new knowledge, whether it's a technology or a bit of information. If it's not done in a way which we can attach to and understand, then it's useless. And of course, everything has to be paid for in some way. So we need to have a business model that works. And if you look at technologies that have made a difference to the world, they've always come with a new business model. Think of iTunes, or in the future, we're probably going to see that we don't own things. We're going to be seeing business models where instead of us buying a washing machine, we buy 30,000 washers, and we've got someone who's then able to take a washing machine away and be able to have that full closed loop economy where they can dismantle it when it's old and then recycle everything. So those sorts of things will change. And then I guess government policy and regulation is critical. You need to have the marketing so that we know what's there to be bought. And so all those things coming together are absolutely critical. And I think up until recently, we haven't thought of it that way. We've thought of everything in being in silos. And so I guess one of the things I've recognized, especially through my career and what I'm hoping to amplify now, is to say we need to make this all come together. And when we have that all operating, that's when we'll see the ability to tackle these great challenges that are ahead of us.
That's terrific. We might skip to the fourth question that we'd had from participants as well. We've got a lot of people who are really interested in developing their careers in the new digital economy and making a contribution. You've had so many different career experiences. It's just fascinating. What would you recommend to those early in their career or mid-career as good activities to develop the skills to lead in digital transformation? Have you got any tips?
Yeah, so look, I think the first thing is we've got to recognise that every career will be digital, and we all need to lift our skill set. And that means, you know, that classic thing of, you know, putting the investment into learning and being open. And that can start from just watching YouTube videos to buying, you know, sort of the idiot's guide to sort of Python or whatever it is that you want to do. But you need to put the effort into it. possibly if you're working, consider asking your employer to support you in doing courses to be able to lift your skill set. I know when I was in CSIRO, they introduced what they call the Data Academy or Digital Academy, and the idea, or Data School, I think it was, and the idea was to look at researchers, particularly technical staff who were being potentially no longer, well, are becoming surplus because digital technologies were taking over their role, automation and other things. And we're saying, well, these are people who deeply know their area. So let's give them a lift up by taking them through a whole training to be able to have the skills that are needed to be able to take their domain knowledge and put then a digital capability across it. And those actual researchers and staff members became absolutely critical to the digital transformation of CSIRO, which I think is pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. And so recognizing it doesn't matter where you've come from, it's not impossible to learn these things. You know, the user interface is really critical, and I think that we shouldn't think I'm too old to learn it. I think we've all got to get in there. We've all mastered mobile phones and computer systems and all that sort of stuff. It's not that much further forward, but we do have to, the Stephen Covey thing of 7 habits of highly effective people. We do need to give ourselves the time to sharpen the saw and to learn these things so that we give ourselves the permission to do that. And if you're not in the workforce, then there's something really interesting that's come out through the STEM Returners program, which is run by Engineers Australia. And that's for STEM-based skilled people to be able to re-enter the workforce after a career break. And it may be early retirement, redundancy, parental leave, whatever it might be, unemployment. And that's a fantastic scheme. I really urge people to look at that. And then the other one is just starting off going to your local, college training. I know libraries often run courses, all those sorts of things, and just look for opportunities. The government runs a lot of return to work courses as well that gives the ability to uplift skills too. So there's a plethora of different ways. And this micro-credentialing is something that universities are beginning to offer as well. So I think we're all going to have to do that. And for those in mid-career, just assume this is going to be part of your cachet of capability that you're going to need.
That's fantastic. Well, we're at the end of our session. We've had another couple of questions, but we'll try and do some summary in the chat afterwards. Thank you so much, Cathy. We've been really, really fortunate to have you. Have a wonderful time for the rest of today. You're most welcome to join us if you would like. And thank you for inspiring us. Even my little grandchild here, who's 3, is inspired by it. You're going to wave?
That's
Eddie?
Great. Oh, hello.
There you go. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful.
All right.
Bye-bye.